Hey guys, excited to share today's episode with you with Matthew Myers, who is a local developer that I'm partnered with who specializes in developing infill pocket neighborhoods. So it's a bit of a blend of an episode where it's partially technical, but not too deep. And then also a bit of cultural commentary and stuff about Oklahoma and development and the industry and design in general. So hope you enjoy it. Like, subscribe, and share. And without further ado, here you go. Okay, well, welcome to the Build and Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Austin Tunnell, and today I've got Matthew Myers on, which I'm really excited about because he is, a developer doing really interesting infill pocket neighborhoods in a very unique way. And also we're business partners, and he's a mentor of mine, and we're business partners on a real estate deal, one of his deals that he's put together in downtown Edmond. So excited to talk to him about development, the process of developing pocket neighborhoods, and what he's learned along the way doing all that. So Matthew, could you start off just by giving a little bit of your background?
Sure.
And what you're up to now?
Absolutely. Thanks, Austin. Quick story about me. I'm married it'll be 30 years in July to Kim, my wife. We have 2 grown children, live in Edmond in a development called the Prairie at Post, which me and a guy named Jeremy Kubicek, a good friend of mine, developed about a little less than a decade ago. And that was my introduction to the real estate world. Is I was trying to find a neighborhood in Edmond that I would fall in love with, and I couldn't find one, right? And so I told my wife one day, I said, you know what, how hard can it be? It turned out to be really hard, right? But that was kind of the impetus and the start of my development journey, is just trying to build a neighborhood where I wanted to live, and we did that, and it's a good neighborhood. There's things obviously that I would do differently, but that's true in every development you ever do. So that was my starting point in terms of real estate development. Since then, we've bought office buildings, we've owned multifamily, we've owned single family, we've owned a portfolio of real estate, which I love real estate for a whole host of reasons. But the development process, the creative elements, the discovery process of it is really fun.
It is fun. It's like an endless industry of learning. Before we jump a little bit more into development, I want to just backtrack a little bit and hear a little bit about your entrepreneurial background and starting of Giant, I believe, and just what that is and that process, and even why you decided to step out of that and into development.
Yeah, great question. So I've been an entrepreneur since getting out of college. We've owned different kinds of business, wide array software technology companies. And then in 2002, me and a guy named Jeremy Kubicek started Giant, and we started growing that. A few years later, we bought a company in Atlanta, Georgia, that was owned by John Maxwell. He's a well-known leadership speaker and author. We ended up partnering with Chick-fil-A and did some of the largest leadership events where we'd fill arenas with presidents and prime ministers and actors and some of the really great leaders of our time, and we would learn and share those leadership lessons with our community. It's a lot of fun and a lot of great times. And so I built that up. A guy named David Woods, good friend of mine, also came and joined us. And over time, we built an organization that had really national and sometimes worldwide influence. I sold my interest in that business in 2015, 16, somewhere in that range, and really just to focus solely on real estate. But it was a great journey. I learned about building teams. I learned about leadership, what great leadership looks like, which is actually pretty rare. And I learned what bad leadership looked like. And when you see bad leadership, boy, it's evident. You can see it. Matter of fact, you can usually see it in the team around the leader as much as you can see it in the leader themselves.
And actually, this is actually why I wanted to bring up Giant, because I had vaguely heard of it, but it was actually when I went somewhere else to a developer in Alabama, very successful guy, very well connected. And he was like, Giant was like a core part of what they were like incorporating into their stuff. And I was like, hold on a second. I know the guy that started that thing, because I'm not from here, so I'd never come across it until you. And then when I'm like sitting there, like on the Giant website and going, oh my gosh, wait, Matthew did. But like, what are some of those, and I know we don't have a ton of time, but like some of those core lessons that really stick out to you about, and actually really quickly, what is Giant in terms of its leadership development training and things like that? Is that the best way to describe it?
Leadership training, culture development training. I'm not as close to the organization as I was today when I was with Jeremy Kubicek, David Woods, and later on Dan Bales, another good friend of mine who helped along the way. But you know, Giant, when you look at the organization, if you look closely, there's a big G and a little I, and I think that's good representation of what a leader is. And so, one of the people ask me, "Well, how do you recognize a good leader?" And one of the first things I say is, I'm always looking in a leader for somebody who gives the credit and they take the blame. They give the credit and they take the blame. Most leaders today do the opposite, right? They want to take all the credit and they give the blame to everybody around them, right? Really bad sign. And the second thing I always look for is I can usually judge a top tier leader just by looking at their team, right? Because it's very, very rare. As a matter of fact, non-existent, I would say, that you have a strong leader and a weak team, because strong teams will only work for a strong, effective leader, right? So I imagine, Austin, if you go to an organization and you weren't a developer, but you were a vice president of an organization, knowing your leadership skills, you're not going to work for a weak leader or a B or C level leader. You're only going to work for an A level leader. So that's why I say I always look at the team around the leader, because they'll tell you the story about the leader himself.
It's really interesting. Is there any, like, even for myself, like, how have you developed your own leadership and management skills? Because they are really skills too. It's not just, there's different types of personalities. There's all sorts of different things, but then leadership is its own thing. You know, different personalities can be different kinds of good leaders. Like, how did you develop yourself?
Good mentors was a good reason. There were people around me in Oklahoma City. Ken Humphreys, which is Kirk's brother, was a mentor of mine. Brian Banks. There was some people that I intentionally spent time with. In the case of Brian Banks, he's a local businessman, entrepreneur, really good leader. Him and Lance Humphreys do a lot of work together. And we spent, I'm going to say, 7 years together every week for an hour to an hour and a half over breakfast, talking about the challenges that we were going through, talking about leadership. I would say, hey, here's a situation I'm dealing with. How would you handle it? He would mentor me through challenges. Maybe I'm buying a company or selling a company. I was handling a difficult employee situation. And he was such a man of humility. That's another great trait of a leader, I think, is that guy that's going to be humble, okay? And there's a reason for that, because people who are humble learn faster than the person who's prideful. Most of the time, the pride's false pride anyway, right? So when I'm looking for good leaders, is the guy that's willing to learn. That's a good indication. You're that way, right? You've got that spirit of learning, and even though you know more about certainly building structural masonry more than 99.9% of Americans. You know, what did you do last month or 2 months ago? You went over to Spain to learn, right? You're always learning. You're always trying to be better at your craft. There's guys that I know that you can't teach them anything because they know everything, right? And that's an indication to me of a weak leader right there. So mentors was a good way, books and attending events is another way, but nothing beats going through the fire and having somebody beside you kind of with their arm around your shoulder saying, all right, let's go do this together. Let's navigate this. And you're going to have your sleepless nights and your shedding tears and their blood, sweat, and tears whenever you're trying to do anything important. But having that team around you to coach you is really helpful.
Yeah, that's I'm like nodding my head yes, because that's really what this situation is. This development we're doing, I've been running a design build company for 7 years, pretty comfortable there. There's still a lot of, when you're doing something different, especially in something like construction where, it's very, 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 very difficult. So I don't mean we just got it all figured out. Everything's easy, grease the wheels. But it's like I'm pretty comfortable in that design build. But development is, I've done a $3 million deal, is the largest deal I've done. And this one that we're working on in Edmond is, close to a $30 million deal, 10 times. And so I would be terrified if I was by myself. Like literally I think I would be overwhelmed to the point of anxiety, and not in a good way. But being able to walk along, do it with you, have you, keep me from and keep us from stepping in it, is really, I just couldn't ask for a better opportunity there.
I appreciate those kind words. One of the ways we know that we're learning and we're growing is when we're uncomfortable. Yeah. right? So you were an athlete, right? You played football.
Yeah.
So you knew you were getting stronger when you go to the gym the next day you're sore.
Yeah.
It's the same way in learning in real estate or whatever it may be. We go through these challenges and the sleepless nights and all those things build our character and build our knowledge and our understanding. And so I think it's really important that you go through those challenges. So I challenge people sometimes, look, if you're not uncomfortable in your job and what you're doing, are you really growing? Yeah. Are you really taking yourself to that next level? And we need to do that, I think, in life to grow.
That's something I'm grappling with more and more of just I find that I'm getting away from the idea that life is about happiness and it's about meaning and purpose. And if you can touch it to that, because life is hard,
it's hard. And also, I think it's really important to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Right. That's what I mean. Like engaging with that and recognize you're going.
Yeah. Being content in being uncomfortable.
You're right.
Right. I was watching the Oklahoma State won the national cross country title recently, and I watched that event, and they interviewed our coach at the end of that, and he challenges athletes to be comfortable being really uncomfortable in the race. It's going to be a totally uncomfortable race because the pace is going to be so fast.
Yeah.
He said, embrace that.
Yeah.
Embrace this. It's hard, and that's good. That's okay. That's good for our team. And in our project, it's a hard project. It's a hard project for me, and I've done a fair amount of this, but it's hard because we're doing something that I believe when it's done, it will be, and I don't think this is boasting. I think this is a true statement. It's going to be one of the best real estate developments in the United States.
Yeah.
I really believe that.
Yeah.
It's going to be one that people are going to come all over the world, maybe the world, but certainly the United States, and look at it because it's going to be a really special. Now, with that comes the minute you introduce this concept, the Townsend we're talking about, to the world, because it's so different, you're going to get the no's are going to come out. You're going to get no's from bankers, from investors, everybody's like, you can't do that. It's, because it's just so outside.
The engineers, the fire department, the trash department, the utilities department.
Right, because it's unusual. Yeah. And anything that's innovative have to understand, anything that's innovative is always going to be, you're going to be told no the first time. It's impossible. You can't do it. People aren't going to buy these. People are going to appreciate it. So on and so. There's going to be a million reasons that people are going to tell you can't do it.
Yeah. And so actually this is a good time to ask the question then. So you started with Prairie on the Post, the neighborhood that you built that you now live in.
Right.
And then you've pivoted pretty hard to what you're doing now. And it's much harder, as you're saying. I'm not saying Prairie wasn't hard,
right,
but I think you've said what you're doing today is quite a bit harder than Prairie. So why? Mm-hmm. Why the interest in doing something harder? Does it make more money? Does it?
Yeah, I think, if I wanted to make the most amount of money in real estate development, probably what I would do is go buy a few hundred acres, a wheat field, and just build cookie cutter houses. It's probably the most profitable, really.
I know some yeah.
I don't think it's the most fun. And I'm not judging anybody who does that.
Right.
There's a need for that. It's just not what I want to do and the way I want to invest my few days that I have on this earth, right? So I wanted to give it to something else. And so the why are we doing what we're doing with the Townsend or the Ember or the Lark or the other projects, which are unusual outside the box projects, is because I wanted to do something that if I'm around in 30 years, I could drive by those neighborhoods and go, you know what? I built a really neat neighborhood. Okay, you live in one right now. As I was pulling up the street here, I was looking around these houses and go, there was a developer years ago. I don't know who it was. Do you know who it was?
It was 100 years ago, but I can't remember.
So he was facing the same things that we're talking about today. The doubts, the disbelief. He probably presented it to a banker, and they're like, "You're out of your mind. What are you talking about? That's a cattle field. You can't do that. You're too far away from downtown Oklahoma City," or whatever the excuse was at the time. And so we're going to get that. So I wanted to build something that 30 years from now I could look back on and be proud of, and something that was lasting. And the Townsend is certainly going to be that. I mean, well past 30 years. Yeah. I bet 100 years from now, long past our lifetime and our kids and our grandkids, that's going to be a really special, one-of-a-kind development. So I do it because it's hard.
Yeah.
They're fun. They're unusual. I don't think they're the most profitable.
Yeah.
Truthfully, I think there's other ways to make money that's easier. But because it's easier doesn't mean we should do it. At least I don't want to do it.
Right. Makes sense. Could you, because we're talking about some of these, several of these projects, could you just provide a little bit of detail, high level overview of each one? You've got the Lark, we've got the Ember, we've got Townsend, these just pocket neighbors, if you want to give a quick overview of those.
Sure. So the projects that interest me the most are the ones whereby a community and relationships of the residents is intentionally built over time. So, for example, we have a development in downtown Edmond called the Lark, and I would describe it as artful, whimsical. They're kind of modern luxury cottages, pretty high-end cottages. And I was driving by the other day, and I saw two homeowners in there sharing a glass of wine on the front porch. Okay, this is maybe 6 o'clock at night, and I thought, isn't that a beautiful thing? Because in most neighborhoods in Edmond, that won't happen. Two neighbors are not going to connect on their front porch over a glass of wine, but they were relatively close. There was a sidewalk between them. They felt safe enough to do it, and then later on they were going to walk down and have dinner down the street. And I thought, well, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? So we have the ability through real estate, I think, to help our tenants or our property owners, homeowners, live a better life. I don't think that's too far of a stretch to say. Live a more fulfilling life, have deeper relationships. I'm a firm believer that the quality of our relationships is proportional to our happiness in many ways. So we have healthy relationships. Generally, our level of happiness is high, and joy is high. And so if we can contribute that in some way, I think that's a good thing. So that's what the Lark is. It's a whimsical, artful, the colorful doors. We actually are naming all the cottages now, which has been a fun process, just like you can name your boat.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah.
You can name your boat. And so now everybody gets to name their house. And so there's the pink door, and there's the sage, and there's the town ranch. They all got their names on the house. It's a lot of fun.
And there's about 42
homes
on 2 acres.
On 2 acres. Okay. Yeah. 42 homes on 2 acres.
And then those sizes are, what are the sizes of those?
Sizes
they're pretty
of the
small.
Home, 700 square feet approximately to about 1,200 square feet. We are going to have the opportunity to build a little bit larger than that, a new plan, but that's about it. 1 and 2 beds generally, but we do have a 3-bedroom plan that we're coming out with as well. And
then congregated parking, kind of like off an alley. Is it off an alley?
Yes, it is. Off an alley. Yeah, corralled parking, corralled mail. One of the things in that neighborhood that's special and unusual, and people are really being attracted to, is this idea that if you go in your garage right now, you probably have a ladder, an extension cord, and tools. And I bet your next door neighbor does too, and probably the other guy on the other side. Everybody, I bet in this neighborhood there's 50 ladders, 50 tools, 50 extension cords. Do you really need all that when you use it once a month, once a year? So we're putting that in a garage vault, and everybody can share it, and you can track that on an app. And we're doing some creative things like that help people declutter and simplify their life. Again, it's back to this idea about community. If you don't have to spend as much time cleaning your house and taking care of all your junk and your clutter that I have in my house and you have in your house, we have more times for people. Yeah. So I'll keep coming back to this thing that me and Anthony Catania, our architect, talks about a lot, which is people first. Yeah. Okay. Not cars first, not construction first, people first. Yeah. And how do you develop around people first? And
everything else falls into place. You have to consider all the other things anyway.
It's around people, and it's about relationships. And if you can get that right, then you can develop a great neighborhood. But most people kind of do that at the very end. Most developers do. Well, let's go put in take the worst lot in our neighborhood and make a park out of it. And they give it to, throw a swing set up there or something. You're like,
surrounded by fences and, gets used,
so that's the Lark. The Ember is a step up in terms of square footage. Totally different vibe. It's more of a brick veneer. We were talking about that brick veneer, but it's going to be beautiful. There'll be gas lanterns on the front porches. The homes are bigger. They go up to about 2,200 square feet. Yep. Same amount of space as the Lark, about 2 acres, but half the number of houses. So there's more green space in there. It's going to be a beautiful neighborhood. I'm talking to my wife about should we move in there or not. But it's going to be it'll be my best neighborhood to date. I feel confident of that. And there's reasons for that. You take all the lessons you learned from the previous developments that you do and you incorporate them into the next one. I think we naturally should get better in our development life. Right. Every development we do. And so it's going to be a beautiful neighborhood.
And that was like 20 houses or so.
23 homes.
23 homes, all for sale.
All for sale.
Some of them have garages.
All of them have garages.
All of them have garages. But some of them were like the garage is detached, right?
It could be a detached garage. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and some of the houses have 2-car garages and some have one-car garages?
With public parking, yes.
And actually, before we talk a little bit about the Townsend, on the Ember and the Lark. So you've got the Lark, which has got about 42 houses 700 to 1,200 square feet, congregated parking, one guaranteed spot covered per one. And then the Ember, which has garages, some of them are 2-car garages, some one. Because obviously parking is a big deal in most American cities, not all, but most American cities. And so when people start hearing, well, one, the small square footages, going like, what? Who's buying 700 to 1,200 square feet? Mm-hmm. And then two, going, wait, these are probably fairly expensive. They're nice. And you're saying people aren't going to have garages. They're going to have a 1-car parking spot.
Correct.
What are people's responses? How are you responding to that? And how are people responding to that you've seen?
So where we develop is Edmond, Oklahoma. The average home size in Edmond, Oklahoma is about 22 to 2,300 square feet. Okay, that's the size of the homes in there, and 3 bedrooms or bigger. However, 60% of the population of Edmond is only 1 or 2 persons, so we have a housing mismatch. We don't need 3 bedrooms. Okay, we need 1 or 2 bedrooms. Number one. Number two, when you study actually where people live, I bet it's true in your house, but it's true in most houses. If I have a 22 or 2,300 square feet, I'm not living in 22 or 2,300 square feet. You really only live, and I live in a 3,400 square foot. I probably use 900 to 1,200 square feet maybe in my house. Okay, so what we've done is we've built these big houses that we've got to heat and cool, condition, clean, furnish, and buy, right?
And maintain. Which is very expensive over time.
Big lawns. It goes on and on, right? And so we just said, you know what if people didn't really want to, they didn't need to live in these big houses. What if we could scale them down to the size where they actually live, but make them nicer?
Right.
So people at the Lark, for example, and it's going to be true in the Townsend as well, those homes are going to be nicer than most $1 million homes in Edmond, even though they might only be 700 or 800 or 1,000 square feet. I promise you, you're going to walk in there and they will feel more luxurious.
Yep.
They will. So that's where we ended up on the size of the house. I actually prefer a smaller house than a bigger house. My favorite house I've ever lived in was a 1,200 square foot cottage by Penn Square Mall. It was efficient. I could move from room to room very easily. I didn't have a lot of room for clutter because space is like gas. It will expand to the farthest walls, right? Your clutter will do the same thing. If you have massive closets, believe me, you're going to keep every shirt you've ever worn, even the ones you haven't worn in 5 years, right? Yep. And so when you're constrained by a smaller closet, you have 5 pairs of jeans, you don't have 25. You have 6 pairs of shoes, you don't have 50. You just don't need all that other junk and clutter that clutters up not only your space, but your mind as well. So we shrunk those houses down, and the parking question was a challenge. We had people go, you will never sell any of these houses because they don't have enclosed parking. Yep. It's impossible because Edmond residents demand enclosed parking because that's all they've ever known. And you know the quote I'm getting ready to give you from Steve Jobs, which I always say this, but people don't know what they want until you show it to them. Mm-hmm. Okay, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And if all they've ever seen was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, attached garage, 2,200 square foot, and they live in Edmond, that's all they know until they see something else. And they walk in and these 900 square foot houses, which feel bigger than their 2,200 square foot house down the street. It does. It will live bigger. Okay. And so we realized, you know what? Why do you need a garage? Well, for a lot of people, it's storage.
Yep.
It's not parking, it's storage. Matter of fact, I was driving up your lot here, and how many people actually park in a garage in your neighborhood?
Almost not. We're sitting in my garage. It's a detached garage, and it's my office.
Yeah, and I park in the street.
Yeah. And almost everyone here parks in their driveway or their street.
And if you drive through the city of Edmond, which is a bedroom community, go there at 7 o'clock at night and look how many people in the neighborhoods are parked in their front yard, or not yard, but in the driveway or in the street, because they're using it as storage. So we started to question, why do you need a garage? What you really want in the summer, you want to stay out of the sun and you want to stay out of the hail. That's what you want. If you can solve that problem for a buyer, I think you're in good shape. Now, I'm sure we've lost a few sales because, I got to have a garage. But a lot of people are like, look, I don't even need it. Matter of fact, what we're starting to see is people will not park under the covered parking. They're going to park what's closest to their house.
Yep.
I've got friends with garages that
Yep.
park because it's closer to the house. It's
Right.
whatever's convenient. So the parking is important. The garage is important, but it's not the most important thing.
And that's what's interesting. Yeah, it's such a good point about I call it creating compelling alternative to show people. Because if people have never seen anything different, they can't even imagine it. And so I use the example of the exact people you described in terms of 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath house, 2-car garage in a subdivision. And you were to go knock on their door and say, hey, how would you like to live in half the size house, no garage, pay twice as much per square foot, and not have a yard? And they're going to go, absolutely not. Why that sounds horrible. And then they go experience a neighborhood like that, and they go, oh my gosh. And that's what Carlton Landing is for anyone Carlton Landing is like the seaside of Oklahoma. And it's so powerful for people. Some people have criticized Carlton Landing because it's like, quote unquote, drive to urbanism, where it's not like really urbanism because people can't live there. It's a vacation community. And I'm going, I am so glad Carlton Landing exists. And I hope there are more, because all the people that live in these houses go down to Carlton Landing, experience the magic of community, of people, of life and vibrancy mixed with privacy, of kids just running around. We call them free range kids. And then they go, okay, now I see some of the benefits. It's not just letting go of something, you're gaining so much. And that's kind of where I think too, a lot of times people, and I think developers and even urban designers, I think with good intentions, make mistakes where it just all becomes about density.
Oh yeah.
Where it's like, we just need more density. And I would agree, and I think you would probably agree, we do need more density. But I like where you come back to, it's like, no, it's not, the purpose isn't density. The purpose is people and creating vibrant communities and human flourishing. And you also need density in certain pockets to do that.
Right.
But density not done well can be pretty horrible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you talk about Carlton Landing and Grant Humphreys and their family's done amazing work, and I'm a big fan down there. And as a matter of fact, one of my real estate regrets is not buying down there when I had the opportunity. Grant,
you probably made triple the money.
I should have bought when I had the opportunity. I had a deposit down there. I might still have a deposit down there that I never exercised. But anyway, they did a great job. But you know what the best part about the Carlton Landing, in my view, is they've inspired so many other developers to say, you know what? Maybe something else is possible.
Right. That's
maybe something else is possible. So you have Selah, which I want to meet them down there sometimes. You have stuff that we're doing up at Edmond. You're seeing all this urban infill. Of course, Wheeler's going on down here. You're seeing things in Tulsa that were never even thought about before.
Right.
And also it helped people like city managers and planners. The planning department goes, oh, well, maybe that's possible. Maybe they can access their garage from an alley in the back and the world's not going to end, or something like that. So I just love the inspiration that the Humphreys families provided with that development.
I really I wanted to spend a moment on this, that what you said, inspiration. And it reminds me when Seaside was being kind of created back in the 80s or so, like everyone was just like, this is impossible. You are insane. This thing is going to fail. Just so much doubt and criticism all around it.
But the Humphreys family took that too.
Oh, I know. That's what I mean. Yeah, they did it all over again here because it's Oklahoma. But it's funny because Seaside ended up being the place where all the developers go to learn about. To like, oh wait, we can do something different. And that's where I go. So often we just think like this is what reality is because this is what the world we live in, and this is how stuff gets built, and that just this is how stuff works. And of course, there's real limitations, but like, reality is also malleable in ways, and I think that's so exciting actually to think about, at least as a young person and a developer. Just we have to be careful. We can't just go out and do something wildly different, but I just mean there's more pioneering, more innovation, more vision left to contribute to that is meaningful. I think there's real meaning in it.
I agree, and I was telling a friend the other day in Edmond over the next decade, which again, I keep mentioning Edmond because that's where my sole focus of development is right now, is the quality of developments that are going to come out of the ground in the next decade is going to be astounding. Yeah. It's going to change the city. And Edmond may even become a center point of new urbanism and pocket neighborhoods and some really unbelievable developments. Certainly for Oklahoma, maybe in the region, I don't know. But the great thing about that, it's going to force developers to get better.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Competition,
challenge each other. And
right.
So I'm a big advocate for sharing everything. Right. So I believe that anybody that comes to me and they're another developer and they go, how'd you do the Lark? How'd you do the Ember? How'd you do the Townsend? It's like, here it is.
Yeah.
I'm an open book, right? Because I want them to get better. I want them to prosper. I want them to go be successful in whatever development. Because if they're doing developments for people first and relationships first, whether I ever get an economic reward for somebody else's development, but I see a great development being done like Carlton Landing or like Wheeler, it's a win for me.
And it makes your city better where you live, you know?
Yeah. So I'm all about that. I'm not one of these developers. A lot of them are like, don't look at my floor plans or don't look at, I'm like, I want to share it in anything I can teach or learn or lessons, mistakes that I made. Hey, if you do a better development than me, then good on you. And I'm happy for you.
That's awesome.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the way I view it.
So some other challenges, we've talked, about these pocket neighborhoods, and we've talked about the size of the houses, the garage, no garage, and kind of how you're addressing that. Another big one that comes up a lot, I think, is you're building smaller, you're building an infill with higher quality finishes and stuff too. So what happens? Your price per foot actually goes way up.
Right.
How can you kind of describe that, and also how you dealt with that and how people have responded to that, including banks and investors and buyers?
Sure. So let's take the Lark as an example. When we came out with the Lark product, it was right kind of in the middle of COVID. And of course, we had this inflationary spike. So homes in Edmond, I think in this region, 30% more to build them now than back then. Mm-hmm. It's just, that's the word.
That's what we see. It's 30 to 40% for
30
us.
40%. So if you thought a house was, you could sell it for $200, now it's $300 a foot. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we had this inflationary spike, but in the neighborhood that I was doing the Lark at, I mean, I had homes across the street when we first started that were $100 a foot.
Yeah.
And I went to my banker and said, I think I'm going to sell these houses for $300 a foot, 3 times a foot across the street. And they look at me and go, are you sure? And I go, well, not really, but I think that we could probably do this. And here's all the reasons why. And of course, they said, well, we'll loan you a little bit. We're not going to loan you that much because we're uncertain of it. But we paid for our development a lot with cash, which is a general strategy that we do anyway to reduce risk. And so we were able to sell it not only for $300 a foot, but after the inflationary spike, we're in the $400 plus range right now for the Lark. And so my experience is there's some education that goes in to selling a house for a higher price point, because a lot of people, there's some people, it's all about the lowest price. Okay, there's some people that want to buy the generic block of cheese or the generic wine. It's all about price, right? And for those buyers, they're probably not going to buy at the Lark. Okay, and I'm not judging them in any way, shape, or form, right? But that's what they want. It's all about low price, lowest price per foot, or lowest price of the house generally. In our case, we said that's not our market. We're going to go for somebody who appreciates quality. And then the minute you shrink a house down to a smaller square foot, boy, your square footage price goes to the moon. So we were more concerned about the overall price tag of the house. So at the Lark, that's about $325,000 to about $525,000. That's our range, about a $200,000 range in there, and that's where that market is. Okay, but some people get hung up on that, and we try to have the conversation around. It's about, do you want to buy a $400,000 house or not? Instead of are you paying, $400 a foot for this house or not? Yeah. Now, some people get hung up on it. Certainly the bankers do. But after we established our comps, which we did early on, when we sold, we sold a dozen like right out of the gate. The comps were set. So from the lenders and the bankers' standpoint, they were satisfied at that point. Now you're just dealing with the public of going, well, why should I pay this when I can go out to suburbia and buy a house for $250 a foot?
Right. It's weird because you're thinking about it just purely as a product, but not the life. It's like you're buying a lifestyle too, and it's really hard to keep that in mind, because if people feel like they're buying, I don't know, it's like apples to apples. It's like you're not comparing apples to apples. comparing apples to
Well, you know, the Lark
oranges.
and soon to be the Townsend and the Ember, there's very few new construction neighborhoods in our city in Edmond where you can walk and get a cup of coffee, walk to breakfast, walk to dinner, walk to buy your groceries, your bank, your you know, go to the mail, pick up your mail or anything like that. So I shouldn't say pick up your mail, but send a letter or something like that. So walkable communities in our city, Edmond, are rare.
Yeah.
The Lark is one of the few new ones. The Townsend will be one of the next ones, along with the Ember. And so there's value in that.
Yeah.
There's value in being able to walk and experience it. And people go, well, why? What's the big deal? I can get in my car if I live in suburbia and drive 15 minutes to get a cup of coffee. I'm like,
Yeah, they actually talk at convenient. People say like, well, suburbia is convenient.
Yeah.
And there is convenience to it.
Yeah,
until it gets too many people.
Yeah, I can jump in my car that I got to pay for, fill it with gas that I got to pay for, pollute the environment. You know, I've got to go. Then I got to wait in line at Starbucks for another 10 or 15 minutes.
Right.
And it's a drive-through, and you say hi, you give them your card, you leave. But what is missing in that formula that I just described? People first.
Relationships of any kind.
It's not about that,
Yeah.
right? So the whole getting to know your neighbors, getting to know the local shopkeepers, walking past somebody on the sidewalk, pausing and having a conversation. Hey, how was your day? Oh, we went to church yesterday. Tell me about that. Well, all that is gone in the suburban car experience. It's just gone. And so I believe that people or say, you know what, I'd rather have this other lifestyle where I can build relationships and community with my neighbors, and that's better for me and my family than having to jump in the car and spend all that time, money, and energy moving around the city along with the other 100,000 people trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, I recently read two statistics that this reminds me of. One of them's from the Realtor Association, whatever, and it's that 78% of Americans would pay substantially more to live in a walkable community. 78%. And that, and that's important too. I mean, I like how you always kind of caveat when you're talking about something. I don't judge people choosing something else in any way, shape, or form, because that is part of our message. It's providing options for people. And our issue, when I say our issue, your issue, and I think my issue, is that there aren't options. Is everything is only suburban sprawl, and that's only what's allowed and mandated and incentivized. And we're just saying, hey, a lot of people want these walkable communities. Let's build some more. And clearly, I mean, 78% of people say they want it and are willing to pay substantially more. Yeah. And then the second statistic from HUD, so a government source, and this was this year, 74% of Americans feel a sense of non-belonging in their own community.
I see that.
And that is, and then you look at the rates of depression and suicide and drug overdoses and kids in particular. I mean, it's horrible. And I think so much of it has to do with the built environment, the human habitat, because that's what the built environment is the human habitat. The hardware we've built isn't good at running software that builds relationships and community and belonging, and things like that.
Most neighborhoods that are built today in suburbia are designed for cars, moving traffic in and out and encouraging people to go to their backyard. Okay, that's where their seating area is going to be. That's where they're going to have their barbecue or their family dinners if they have them outside. To keep people inside, because why would you go outside? Right. There's traffic going up and down the street. There's a lot of neighborhoods don't have sidewalks, and if they do, they're poorly designed and they feel threatened by the street. There's all kinds of reasons they don't use that. That is a totally different than what you and I are doing in these pocket neighborhoods in these walkable environments. And I know because I own property in the suburban area, and I own property in suburbia. Right. And so I own urban and suburban right now. And so I get to experience both. And there's things I like about each one. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. One is just different. So if relationships are important to you, if getting to know your neighbors, if being able to slow down in life and walk and have a cup of coffee and sit down and have a conversation with a friend is important to you, great. If the only thing that's important to you is you want to be alone in the world and read a book and keep people away from you, then maybe that other lifestyle is better. No judgment there, by the way, from me. It's just a different lifestyle.
Yeah. Something I think this is kind of a good segue into this idea of design. I know you've talked about the importance of design and say even some lessons you've learned on the Lark, but one thing I'll say about this idea of pocket neighborhood, like why is it called a pocket neighborhood, and what do I even mean by pocket neighborhood? And I actually haven't really thought about this, except okay, say it a pocket neighborhood because it's small. I think that's kind of what we say. It's small. It's tucked in somewhere. It's part of a in a more urban environment. But the reason we actually call it a pocket neighborhood and not just a collection of houses or a real estate development is that it has very intentionally a sense of identity and a sense of place, and it feels like a neighborhood. Right. Because that's the problem. If you just start talking about density urbanism, well, you can build dense urbanism, but that doesn't necessarily build community because it's not a neighborhood. You're not encouraging, and I like that sense of it's self-contained, it's still open to the world, but there is this semi-privacy to it. It's its own thing. So I don't live on whatever 2nd Street or Hurd Street. I live at the Lark. And then there's this shared identity of living at the Lark and what it is to live at the Lark. And so much of that comes down to the urban design of it. And there's architecture and landscaping and other things. And I guess you could just wrap that all into design. What are the lessons that you learned on your first development with the Lark, doing a pocket neighborhood, designing that? Because I think I've heard you say something about regretting something before.
There's a lot of I don't know if regret's the right word, but things you do over. But I had the same thing on my first development called the Prairie, the Lark. It's just lessons you've learned. One of the things that I would say, and I want to ask you a question here in just a second, and the Lark is 41 homes, between 39 and 41, depending upon do we build a single house on one of the duplex lots. But let's call it 41 homes. To most people, they would look at it and say there's 41 homes. I look at it and say there's 5 pockets of about 8 homes each.
Yeah.
Okay. So we break this up into this 5 pockets because the book that everybody's familiar with called Pocket Neighborhoods by, I forget the author. Ross Chapin. Yes. He talks about this idea that have relationships with 40 neighbors is a challenge, but 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's reasonable. Okay, so we design these neighborhoods around a pocket. Could be around a pocket park. Right. It could be around a fire pit. It could be around something that kind of brings people outside of your house. Your neighborhood right now doesn't really have that. There's nope. I think there's a sidewalk out there, but
on parts of it,
parts of it kind of navigates then. Yeah. So one of the questions I've had, and I want to ask you this, is what is the minimum? I think the maximum number is about 10 to 15 in a pocket. What is the minimum number you can have to feel like a community?
I'm just going to go, like my gut thing is, I can give an example. 6 is what we did at Carlton Landing. That was a pocket neighborhood we did at 6. And that was an interesting one. You brought up an anecdote from earlier of people sharing wine together on a porch. When we finished the last house there, there's 6 houses. We finished the last house. And one day on Facebook, I just saw, this is years ago, I just saw pictures of like the first Friday night there, like when the last homeowner moved in. And it was like everyone at the Bend in this little pocket neighborhood on someone's front porch singing karaoke. And it was all completely random, like it wasn't planned. And I had that moment of going, this is why I do this.
Yes.
Like that is why. And they weren't tagging me. It wasn't like, it was just, I just saw it randomly. It was just completely organic, you could say. And so that's kind of a reference there. That's 6 houses. And I saw that happen, which is pretty cool. And I think about 2, I think 6, because sometimes 4 might be too intimate, like I kind of like that 6 to 8 where because that's the thing about suburban subdivisions is it's very difficult to have casual relationships. You either have friends, like people know, and then that's about it. Or like so casual, they're not even relationships because you just, bought coffee from them on the drive-through. And that's what I like about these neighborhoods. It's you can have friends, you can have these other relationships, and then there's these in between where it's, hey, how's it going? Oh, how's the weather or whatever? How was that? You just got back from vacation from Montana. How was it fishing? You might not have ever had them in your house to eat for dinner, but like there's connection there and there's comfort there that you can build. I don't know. What do you think about that? 6 to 8.
I think I changed my mind as you were talking. Okay. I was going to say 3.
Okay.
But I actually think the number is anything more than 1.
Yeah. That's a good.
Anything more than 1. And if you think about it is, what does it take for you and I to have community, or your family and mine? It's you and plus 1.
Yeah.
So you could actually have two houses with a common courtyard between them. Now, you might say, well, what if they're a bad neighbor? I get all that stuff, but I'm just saying, what is the minimum? I think two homes, for the simple reason is the way you have a conversation with somebody is to have you and somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? I think 3 is probably better than 2.
Yeah.
I think 4 is probably better than 3 up to a certain number.
Right.
Like, just like people have studied meetings, once you get to about, I think the number 7 or 8 into a meeting, the effectiveness starts to go down. It probably is the same thing in a pocket neighborhood. So maybe the optimal number is between 3 and 8.
Right.
I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's ever studied it, but it's definitely more than 1. I think you could do it with 2 if it were well planned, but in a pocket, probably not much more than 10, something like that.
No, that's interesting. And one thing I would add to that is actually my neighborhood, and just for you listening, these are 50 by 150 foot urban lots. And I say urban because I'm 2 miles from downtown Oklahoma City. And, I know the neighbors directly to the next to me and then across the street from me. So I know 3 neighbors in terms of number of houses.
And there's hundreds of neighbors?
There's hundreds, and actually we see each other because we'll be taking out the trash, just being in our front yard, and we talk and have, it's fun. Mm-hmm. But I don't feel like part of a larger neighborhood. It just feels like I know 3 people that live near me, but I do not feel like part of a larger neighborhood or a larger community. Mm. And I don't mean because there's not enough HOA dinners or something, because I use this example. There's a park that we can walk to in about 10 minutes. We go there, and then even the HOA, a couple times a year has an event there, which is great. I'm glad they do. I'm not saying I wish they didn't, but at the same time, when we go, it's always like, you haven't seen anyone in 6 months, and so you go there and you don't remember anyone, and you remember them, but you don't remember their names or anything about them, and you're just always starting over because you don't have any little touches in between, so you're always starting over, and it feels awkward, and just you never can get there to community because there's no other options to interact. So the thing I would say about what we're talking about is that little pocket of 1 to 8, I think that makes sense to me. But you want a series of those spaces that are part of a community. I mean, if all you can do is 6 or 8 houses, great. That's fine. But I mean, if you can do something bigger, it's about creating series of spaces and places within a larger mosaic, you could say.
Yeah, I think there, as developers, we can do a fair amount of things to promote this idea of people first in relationships, right? The way we handle walkability, the width of sidewalks, the type of sidewalks, the way we put a sidewalk in relation to the street, right? Is it next to the street, or is there a planting tree bed there? All those kinds of things add to whether somebody's going to walk or drive, right? But there's also this idea of, I was going somewhere with this discussion about, I was going to say, we can develop certain things as developers, but there's also, once the development's done, that having a champion or champions in the development is really important. So at the Lark, there's a lady in there, I don't want to say her name, just she may not want me to say it, but she moved in from New Mexico, and she's taking the helm of the person who is welcoming people to the community, to hosting dinner. She might bring you wine, and you have that person. So in my neighborhood, at the Prairie, we have not elected, I guess it's a social chairman, basically. Now they're doing dinners, and part of our HOA budget goes to these events.
Smart.
Okay? And I would encourage any HOA to be intentional about that. Okay? So we might do dinners on site. That might be a 4th of July, you buy fireworks. It might be, and I would say frequency is better than big events.
Yeah.
Okay? Hot chocolate, s'mores night. Many of these as you can do, the better to get people to build relationships.
I think that is so
neighbors.
key what you just said. Frequency over scale. And I think I miss that. I think as humans, we're not wired that we want to go big or something like that. And I think the frequency is so much more effective than what I was just saying. 1 or 2 big events a year doesn't really move the needle in terms of community. It sounds sexy for marketing, but it's not
think of it in your marriage with Sarah, right? It's all those little things. It's the note.
2 dates a year and we go to the nicest restaurant.
Not going to happen.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that doesn't build for a good relationship.
It's the note. It's the emptying the dishwasher, whatever her love language is, right? Whether it's acts of service.
I love that comparison. Yeah.
And you can think about all those things. It's the same thing in a community, right? With your neighbors. If you want to develop a great neighborhood, we can set the agenda as developers. We can say, okay, we're going to have some money going from the HOA into a budget, and then the neighborhood decides how to spend that money. I think having a calendar of events that we can provide our community and say these are all set by us, and we're going to encourage you to take the baton and run around the track with it once we're done with the development. But that's rare, by the way. Most developers they're like, how do I get out of this as fast as I can? Right. Developers, that's just the way the world really works. They want to build the houses, develop it, and move on. And this is one of the reasons why you and I've talked about this. So it's so important that when I do a neighborhood, and I know you're going to do the same thing, is to own an asset in that neighborhood when it's all done. Yeah. So commit to it up front. Like, I'm going to own a house at the Lark. Doesn't mean I have to live there. I might rent it. I might use it for various purposes, but I'm going to own it. And what that does is that holds me to a level of accountability to that neighborhood, because you and I make 1,000 little decisions along the way of development. Yeah. Width of the sidewalk, depth of the sidewalk. Do we add brick here, pavers there? What type of materials we use? And it's very easy for us in terms of trying to save money to drift toward mediocrity. Yeah. When you know you're going to own something there, it keeps you accountable. Yeah. It's the difference when you build your own house for Sarah and you build your house for somebody else. It's human nature is you're going to take care of that construction process better. Yeah. So that's one of
it's like a check on yourself, keeping your incentives aligned.
You have to align your incentives,
Yeah, I kind of like that. Hold yourself accountable. Mm-hmm. To bring it back to a little bit more on the practical note too, on the design, we talk about density. You were talking about sidewalks and landscaping, how important these little details are. If you're just a conventional developer, how do you learn those things? And how do you develop a neighborhood like this if you don't really know all those things? Like, what would be your advice there?
To somebody, okay, I got a question this week from a developer, and this person is developing, I want to say they're developing 100 or 150 doors right now. It's a build-to-rent neighborhood. I don't want to say their name. And I'm going to paraphrase what this person said to me. They go, I'm building these, and it's all about cost and profit and the economic ratios that are all important to us, rent per square foot and those kinds of things. He goes, but I want to build something beautiful, something meaningful, something that's lasting. And in his soul, he was telling me that he wanted to do something that he could be proud of in 30 years. And he was questioning that a little bit, okay? And I appreciated that. So we had a good conversation of, can you build economically and affordable, and can you build beautiful at the same time? And I think you can, but it is more work. Okay. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about developing, it's you were an athlete, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and you played a little bit of college ball. Yeah. Okay, I was a little bit of a college athlete, wrestler and such. But to go to these levels, to the college level, or some of my training partners were Olympic champions, and I watched them train for the Olympics. The level of commitment to get to that is unbelievable. A lot of people can go to 80% of the way there, but to go from 80 to 100, it's almost triple the effort to get to 80. And I would say development's the same way. If you want to really develop an amazing neighborhood that we're all excited about, like, Seaside and Alice Beach and those kinds of things, you've got to be committed to it in a way that you haven't done before. And so when a lot of developers come to me and they say, I want to do what you've done, my first reaction to them is, no, you don't. Yeah. You really don't want to do it. You want to keep doing what you're doing. You want the outcome, but you don't want the effort.
I say this to people all the time about brick houses, because I get a lot of questions of how do I build a brick house. Yeah. So.
And what do you tell them?
I say it's really hard. Yeah. It's really hard. And most of them back off pretty quick.
Right. We all want to be the national champion. We want to, do all these things in life, but to pay the price and to commit to it. So it's and most people don't want to do it. So I would tell somebody, but you can get part of the way there.
Right.
You know, not we all don't have to be Olympic champions, right? We can say, look, I'm willing to go to this level. And I think developers in general can take a few more steps than they're taking and not kill them.
Right.
And it's not going to break the bank, and their bankers aren't going to get mad at them.
Yeah.
But I would do that by partnering with people who know and understand these things. Primarily a good architecture and design firm. Yeah. I'm not saying there's not some in Oklahoma that get what we're talking about here today. I just haven't found very many.
Right.
I made a statement in a panel the other day with Jonathan Dodson, and I said, hey, maybe 5%, 1 out of 20 get this conversation. They'll all nod their head and say, oh, yeah, I get it, urbanism, walkability. Right. And you saw him draw up a neighborhood. It's terrible. Right. And I saw Jonathan nodding his head like, yeah, he gets that. Right. So you've got to find a partner that's that top 5%. Yeah. Top 2, 3%. And there's just not many of them. Yeah. Okay. Because you've got to be willing to commit to a level of work that most people aren't willing to do. Right. It's like, you want a house plan? I'll print you off one I got in my file drawer. Is that what you want? Yeah. Okay. Same thing with engineers, you know. So it's harder work. But if you want beauty and you want excellence, that's what it's going to take. And you've got to not just design it that way, but you've got to be committed through the entire process. I'm talking about from the time that you move that first rock out of the way, all the way into the last brick that goes in the wall. You've got to have somebody being the guardian of that project, because it will drift toward mediocrity so quickly. Yeah. Right, your contractor say, hey, we can save you $100,000 by doing this. You know, we can use this material. You don't need sidewalks that wide. Let's shrink them down. You don't need as much landscaping in front of your house. Shrink it down. And it's very tempting. You're looking at your budget and you're going like, how am I going to do this? And it starts to do this. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And people start with good intentions to go to the end and have a great development like we've seen. It's hard.
Yeah, I think that's like what you're saying about finding, like if you're already an urban designer and wanted to be a developer, that's kind of one conversation, because then you're learning the process of development and raising money and things like that. But if you're a developer trying to do pocket neighborhoods, I would think my advice is find a great urban and architecture designer. And there's, like you're saying, there's not that many, but you can find them though. That's the thing. They're out there, and there's more out there, and it's really searching for, Google new urbanist neighborhoods and designers and pocket neighborhoods and traditional neighborhood development, and until you find someone that can walk you through, because it's so design oriented, because every detail matters, because the scale is down, you're so much closer together. And the other thing that I would say is the interplay of urbanism, the plan, and architecture is the same. Those really need to be worked out together. And in a traditional neighborhood, it's someone just chops up the lots, and then, some house plans get made and some people build them. This is more like you need the urban design and the architecture done together, because you don't want that window looking into this window, and all these facades have to work together, and you don't want too many variation, but you don't want to look like a cookie cutter home.
To be a great neighborhood, you're exactly right. It's not, if you go to suburbia, you can sequence it. Yep. Buy the land, hand it to the engineer. They come up with all the utilities, the roads, the lots. Then you can hand it to an architect. I mean, in suburbia, that probably works. I'm not saying it's a great process, right. But that's the way most of it's done. But if you want it done right, you've got to start day one, and you got to move that designer and that architect that has that passion, and they're rare. I mean, you want that guy that's that gets excited and giddy about this process. Yeah. Anthony Catania is one of those guys. You have Matt. Right. That's one of those guys for you. And we were talking to Anthony, and I said, Tim, and we were interviewing him with Union Studio. I said, what do you love to do on the weekends? And he goes, I love to go to cities. Yep. And I like to walk to their downtown, and I like to sketch things. And I'm like, he's just saying that. Right? Who does it? He does it.
He's just pictures. He's like, look at this curb, the way this curb does right here, and how that affects it. And I'm going, oh. Okay, he's got passion. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody who has as much passion about your project as you do. And that's hard to find. Right. I mean, hard to find. It is. I mean, I've had architects show up for meetings, and they bring me plans. I'm like, you do understand the plan you're showing me is from another project. Right. It's not my project. It's somebody else's project. Oh, and their minds, because I got 20 other projects, and they don't care about it.
So when you're interviewing those guys, look for that guy it's passionate about your project. So when you tell them, you want the guy that's telling the architect and the designer that's telling most people no.
Yeah.
That's who you want. Like if he's turning down all this other work, like if you brought him a traditional suburban neighborhood, he's like, I'm asleep. I don't want any part of that.
That's who you want.
Yeah.
That's a good way to say it. A really good way to say it.
So.
Yeah. Well, let's do a few kind of like rapid fire questions.
Sure.
Doesn't have to be like too quick of an answer. How do you think about business differently now than you did 30 years ago or 20 years ago?
Well, probably, hopefully a lot different. I saw when I was younger, I think this is normal when you get older. When you're younger, you see things more as a transaction. Okay, how do I do this and earn this? How do I meet this person so they can advance me here, right? And as you get older, and as I've gotten older, I think about longevity. I think about relationship. I think about helping people who I know will never be able to help me, and that's good and that's okay, and I'm fine with that, right? I'm at peace with that. And seeing developers that maybe come to my office and they're developing in another state and they want to spend a couple hours with me. You can't do that all the time, but I try to, knowing I might never see their project, and that's good. I'm good with that. So I would say that it's more relational with me. It's you want to start to do things. I think it's generally with your age also. You want to see things that last. So you want to build things that have meaning, right? And you want to build projects. The Townsend's a great example of that. It's going to be a beautiful project. We're going to go through some pain and suffering to get there. 100%, I know that, but that's just the nature of developing something extraordinary. But it's going to be beautiful. So I'd say relationships are more important today than they ever were to me. Doing things of longevity and quality are more important to me than ever. Being patient, I'm inherently an impatient person. Anybody that knows
Are
me,
you really?
Yes, very impatient.
You must have really worked on yourself.
Well, I've gotten more patient over time because life's taught me to be impatient. But I'm probably the most impatient person that you know. I don't like meetings. Any meeting over 30 minutes to me is no good. It should not happen. So I don't like long meetings. But I've learned, if you want to have relationships with people, you better slow down. You better. It's okay. Right?
Interesting.
So
yeah.
That's the first thing that came to my mind. But
No, those are
probably,
awesome.
Probably other answers that are.
I really
just
enjoyed that. No, that's cool. There's kind of a fun, open-ended question. What's been on your mind lately? Like, it could be personal, could be business, could be life, could be some world event, could be fishing, like whatever. I don't know. What's kind of been on your mind lately? Is taking thoughts up.
Everything that we've been I'm going to answer this from a business perspective. Okay. There's a lot of personal things I've been thinking about, like how do you go through life without fear, living without fear. We did a Grand Canyon hike recently, and it's terrifying. And I've been thinking about fear a lot, and fear is a natural part of life, and overcoming fear. So a lot of things on the personal side, but I'm going to answer this in the context of real estate, since that's the discussion today. I've been thinking about, so we've got these amazing developments in Edmond between the Lark, the Ember, the Stroll, 103 Broadway, that are beautiful and artistic and long-lasting, and they're going to look good 100 years from now. All those things that you and I just spent the last half hour talking about. And I've also been thinking about, are there ways to offer that similar experience at a different price point? That's one of the things I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about RV parks. People are like, RV parks? Yeah, I've been thinking about, how do you do an RV park that doesn't feel like an RV park? Because I do know that there's going to be some people that can never afford to live at the Townsend or the Lark or the Ember, right? But maybe they have a Sprinter van, and that's where they live. And what if we could do something that would be amazing for that population of people? Or what if they can afford to live in a $80,000 manufactured home? What could we do there that would be incredible? So I've been thinking about recently RV luxury travel resorts, and is there a way to do that in an unusual, special way of all the lessons we've learned over here and bring them to that environment? There's a few being done around the country, but I think it's much like pocket neighborhoods. It's very early in the life cycle of those.
That's that's cool. It reminds me of just this really quick, Andreas Dwani, who's one of the founders of New Urbanism. I remember this was years ago, but he was starting to look into how do you do more affordable or attainable housing, and because of all the rules and regulations, and realizing, if you put it on wheels, you can do all these things because the rules are different. So he started researching, going around the country to mobile home parks and RV parks and stuff like that. And one of the kind of tenets of New Urbanism that you see in neighborhood after neighborhood, whether it's Wheeler, Carlton Landing, or Seaside, is the idea of front porches. And it's not like an architectural rule. It's because, how it invites people to be on the porch and helps human interactions. Well, he was talking about in these RV parks and these mobile home communities, there was no porches at all. And it was some of the best, close-knit community you could possibly find. And it was really, separating that idea of it's not the porch, right, per se. It reminds me of that, you talking about that, kind of an interesting thing to think about. Doing something like that.
I mean, when there's constraints, people always look at constraints as being a negative thing. Let's talk about constraints. I only have this much money to spend.
Right.
Or I only have this much space to build a house on, or whatever the constraint is in your life. Constraints are some of our best gifts that we're given. Okay, when I did a lot of startup tech, entrepreneurs, backing them and starting them myself, man, the kiss of death for a lot of entrepreneurs early on is a lot of money. Getting too much too early from an investment, somebody wanted to invest in their deal, because you start throwing money at problems instead of getting creative, okay? And so constraints are a good thing. So when I look at a mobile home park, okay, I got this much to build on, and I've got a price point that needs to be here. What can I do? Okay, where do I need to build it? Those kinds of things. So I always try to think about constraints whenever you're posed with a problem from maybe it's the city going, we're not going to allow that. We're going to only allow this. Okay, how do I get really creative inside the box? So instead of thinking, how do I get outside the box, say, how do I stay inside the box and get more creative? So the thing there is, how do you embrace the constraint to get more innovative? And some of your best ideas are going to come from that.
Yeah, I love that.
So, yeah. Cool. Mobile home RV parks. I'm hesitant to use the name mobile homes because it just throws everybody into a tailspin about what that looks like. Smaller homes are interesting to me. I think we're going to see a lot more of those. Yeah. I think we're going to see manufactured homes in America in the next couple of decades dramatically change, because you've been to job sites and how inefficient a job site is, how messy. Yep. How much waste is there? Yep. Surely there's a better way to build a dwelling than what we're building it today at scale. Right. Seems to be, right? Surely you could build those.
Seems like it.
Seems like there's a better way to do it.
If you look at, there's charts about showing the productivity increases across the board over the past 100 years of all sorts of different things and industries. And construction, there is some progress, but it's way behind everything else in terms of productivity increases.
Yeah, and part of that's code and part of it, but people are testing these printed houses with concrete.
And then we're always adding more to our houses too. Our houses literally get more complex every year.
Oh yeah.
And that too. And of course, you're not working in a tightly controlled manufacturing environment with robots and computers and all sorts of processes. This is kind of, it's the Wild West of manufacturing, really, is what it is.
It is. And you have people that show up that may or may not be sober. Right. Yeah, that'd be a really interesting study to what % of the contractors who are building your house are sober when they're building your house. Think about that.
I'm going to say, since I'm a builder, all of ours, just from a risk perspective.
Fair enough.
100%.
Fair enough. All of ours are, of course. All of ours are sober. But when you look around, you're like, okay, I'm looking at, things that are left at the job site. And I'm like, okay, that's not good. I'm looking up, the guy's not strapped in. He's doing a roofing job and he hanging upside down in the rafters, putting in HVAC stuff. And you're like, okay, this is inefficient. This isn't safe. Surely there's a better way to do it. So why I always say to our home buyers, look, I know you think you're going to buy a house from us at the Lark that's perfect because it's brand new.
Yeah.
Okay. But
perfect.
Before you move in, I want to tell you something. This house was built with imperfect people, with imperfect materials. And when you combine those two things, you're going to have an imperfect house. So you're going to move into a house that's not perfect. We try to make it as perfect as we can, but it's not going to be. So when you move in, there's going to be there's going to be chipping paint, plugs may not work, there might be a leak. So just expect it, and my job is to come back in and fix that house. So anyway, the point of that whole dialogue there was, I think there might be better ways to build homes in the United States. It may not happen in our lifetimes because there's this whole industry built on these subcontractors, and maybe that is the best way for right now. But boy, it feels inefficient.
It does,
and looks not optimal to me.
Yeah,
and people are trying to do it buildable, and all these companies are out there trying to, show up and unfold the house at your job site, and those kinds of things. And probably in the future, that's going to happen.
Yeah, it's a good one. Just two more. What's your favorite thing about Edmond?
Probably I know it well. And let me explain what I mean. I've been asked before, where do you love to travel? What's your favorite place? Those kinds of things. I'm convinced that I could live in any city in the United States and be totally happy. Okay? Going back to so much of our quality of life is about relationships, that whether I'm in El Paso or Newport or Santa Barbara or anywhere, I'd be perfectly satisfied. Now, I don't like traffic like Dallas. Edmond has no traffic for the most part. But that's where I'm going back to. I know it and I know the people. That's what I like about it. I could quote you all the stats of it. It is the safest city in Oklahoma. The homeless population is almost non-existent, and it does have the best schools. If you're a criminal, you don't want to commit a crime in Edmond because they're going to be on your doorstep before you know it. Just call the police in Edmond. Telling you, 5 cars show up at your house. Very safe. People are good. There's things about Edmond that, I could improve, but I would say that about any city in the United States. I like it because I know it, and that's where my relationships are. But again, if you live in another city, I bet you have a great city too because you know the people and you know the relationships.
How you're saying reminds me of a G.K. Chesterton quote. He says, Rome wasn't loved because she was great. She was great because she was loved.
There you go.
And that's really what a place is. It's you're there and decide to love it and build relationships and make it better. And that's really what a place is. And every place can be beautiful and unique. And
Edmond did some things years ago that were really forward thinking. They committed to a school system that made a huge difference. And, it is the most educated city in the state.
Wow.
Okay. As a result of that, it attracted, good developers. It attracted good homes, good businesses, beautiful art.
Yeah.
It's one of the most artistic cities in the United States, and people go, art, big deal about art. But art's one of those things that adds beauty.
Oh, yeah.
The world needs more beauty today. Everything doesn't need to be functional. It can just be beautiful, and that's good, and it creates positive emotions. And Randall Shadid, a good friend of mine, is taught me a lot about art in the last 5 years, and I just recently served on the Edmond Visual Arts Council. But you can go to any street corner in downtown Edmond, you're going to see art.
Yeah.
And the city's invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in art. And I see art tourists that come to Edmond from all over the world, believe it or not. They will walk through downtown Edmond. Hey, where are you from? I'm from Sweden. I'm from here. I'm from there. Looking at the bronzes, looking at the murals.
Wow, that's really cool.
So I do love the art. There's a lot of elements I love. I love Arcadia. I spend a ton of time hiking the trails of Arcadia. I bet I spend more time. This may be an overstatement, so take it for what you will. But I might spend more time in the woods in Edmond than anybody in Edmond.
That's
so
cool.
2 hours a day for 365 days a year. I'm in the woods.
Are you serious?
So I hike in the morning and I hike at night every day. This morning.
You really probably are
So the only I was trying to think who might be the other. It's probably the forestry guy or somebody.
Right.
I don't know, but it's one of a few guys. I see people on the trails like me. I saw my friend Mike Rourke, who runs a YMCA. He was out there today running his dog. But I love the trail system at Arcadia. Yeah. It's beautiful. You can get out there and get lost in a good way, right?
Very cool. Mm-hmm. And just to wrap this up, how do you imagine you want to be spending your time in 10 years? How do you imagine life looks? What's different? What are you working on, thinking about, doing?
Yeah, I want to help more young developers and see them successful. That's really important for me because I think there's going to be guys, matter of fact, I don't think it, I know it, they're going to come after me in our city, in Edmond I'm talking about. They're going to design at levels way beyond me, okay? And that's the way it should be. Mm-hmm. As developers, we should want the next generation to surpass us.
Right.
If we have a good heart and we want to do that. So in your case, I mean, when you and I met, and I've told you this, and I've said it publicly, that you're going to surpass, when your development career is over, you're going to surpass anything that I've done and probably most developers in the state. I believe you're going to be one of the great developers in the United States when it's all said and done because you've got a great eye for it and you've got a great passion for it. There's a lot of things to learn along the way. But I want to see that. So there's a couple of other younger developers. They don't have to be younger. They could be older. Mm-hmm. But I want to see other developers be really successful. And for those people who go, you know what, I want to develop a people-first neighborhood.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Because it's more than just design. Design helps. Good architects help. But how do you help a developer build something that he can look back on in 30 years and be really proud of? Because I know some people have built stuff and they're not.
Yeah.
It was totally a money deal, and they try to turn that HOA and get out of there as soon as they can, and they will never own in their own neighborhood. I know guys that would never own a house in their own neighborhood.
Yeah.
They're like, get me out of here, because they know how they built it and they weren't proud of it.
Wow.
So I would want to do that. I want to see other people be really successful, other developers, because at the end of the day, if you and I can build a great neighborhood like the Townsend, when it's all done, imagine 5 years from now, it's all done. We're walking by and there's going to be a mother and a daughter sitting on their front porch, sharing a hot cocoa on a winter night, and we're going to go, that's why we did it right there. It wasn't about the bricks, and it wasn't about the money, and it wasn't about all these other things that we get focused on every day. It was about the people and the relationships and the community. Then I think you and I have done a good job on the Townsend.
Well, Matthew, thank you very much for being on today.
You betcha.
It was really fun to chat with you, and definitely we'll have to have you on again, especially when we get a little bit farther with this Townsend. And I like this idea of kind of walking people through the step-by-step, how did it start, to how did we do the site plan and get TIF funding and work through engineering and trash and fire to getting it financed, and boom, we're starting. So we'll be doing that here in the next maybe 6 months or something.
It's going to be an amazing development. I'm glad to be on the journey with you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Austin.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.